This is Thorin from On Gamers, and I'm here to do another episode of Thorin's Theories, as we've labelled this series. The first one I did was about CLG, and the concept of the series is it's like an investigation of a team using the statistics of the team, but trying to weave a story between it, trying to find some of the context and things that the stats suggest, not just the raw number on its own, putting it in the context of other information. So this one is going to be about LMQ, the Chinese team who, for a long time, it looked like they were potentially going to win the regular portion of the split. In the end, they came in tied for first, and then they lost the tiebreaker to Cloud9. So technically, they didn't win the regular portion of the split, but they'd spent the whole split top two the whole time. A lot of the time tied for first place, and with some very impressive results. And so when we go into these stats to see like why, or suggest what their strengths were and why they were able to do so well, let's set up the context of who LMQ were. Because I'm sure, yeah, okay, a lot of people now know LMQ from LCS, and maybe some fraction of that knew them from Challenger Series, but actually you got to go back in time further. So let's go back to when they were in China. Now, you've probably only heard about them in China when people kind of derisively say, oh, the team who was on top of LCS NA, weren't they the sixth best team in China? As if to sort of say, you know, wow, NA must be bad if like the sixth best team can come over and dominate and be on top. There's a little bit of truth to that, okay? But it's not the entire story. Like when LMQ was in China, and they played on a slightly different name, but it was LMQ. First of all, they didn't have Godlike. They didn't have Ackerman, as he's now called. Godlike, he was in Royal Club, the team that went to the finals of the Season 3 World Championship. I'm sure most people know that. But they had a different top laner. Now, the only player they actually did have, believe it or not, in that LPL lineup that finished 6th was No Name. He was the jungler. But beyond that, the other players weren't in starting roles. So Moore, the support player, he was a sub. Vasilii used to go under the name TS, he was a sub. XiaoWeiXiao, Vasilii is the AD carry. XiaoWeiXiao, the mid laner, the star of LCS NA now, he was a mid laner, but he's a sub. So, okay, it's not really the same team. There's like one player who is an active starter in that lineup, so you can't really take that result directly. Now, with that said, the reason there's a greater truth to that is, yeah, that team did finish 6th, but also it doesn't really take away that what the people are cynically trying to say there. There is some merit to it, which is that, okay, XiaoWeiXiao has been a monster, he's been the MVP of this season, perhaps, and yet you look at his performance in China, and again, he wasn't a starting player, and that wasn't like that was an elite level team, you know. So, okay, there's something to it, but it's worth setting up the context, okay. So LMQ comes over to North America, a different lineup because they've had to take these subs. I'm guessing they had to take people who wanted to move to North America and didn't want to stay in China. So for whatever reasons, they bring this team over. They add Ackerman, as he changes his name to then from Godlike, a guy who's actually been got pedigree, got tenure. He went to the final of Season 3 Worlds. They bring this lineup over, and people are wondering how they're going to do. In the Challenger Series, the Challenger scene in general, they tore it up. After 2013, the initial adaptation to the American scene, integrating themselves into American life, they just started going mental. They won pretty much every single Challenger tournament they played in 2014. The only time they even really got tested, if we're being honest, was at the final of the Challenger Series when they played versus Cloud9 Tempest, another of the top teams in the Challenger Series. And even then, they only got tested in as much as they won the series, but it was 3-2 in the final. And so, okay, even then, people were really only questioning them in the sense of like, oh, do they have performance issues? Like, they're so good in practice and online, like, is it maybe when they get to the studio and they're in the best of 5 and the lights and the cameras on, do they then have performance issues? It's never like, are they not that good? Because actually LCS pros the whole time had been saying, this team's incredible. Like, of all the Challenger teams, these are way above their level. We scrim them, you know, and like they're like really good, and they're the only players that can go back and forth with us. And we're hearing a lot of hype, and actually was reminiscent of the hype that we heard in the past for Cloud9, where they'd had this incredible scrim record, and then obviously they did come into LCS and more than deliver on that expectation. They actually dominated LCS, become the greatest team probably in North American history at this point. Now then, you don't want to go too far on that. That's why people didn't want to entirely overinvest on that, even though there was a lot of hype around LMQ, because, okay, I remember some other situations where teams in the Challenger scene were dominating. So two that come to mind is the Complexity lineup of late 2013 after Worlds. I remember Scara telling me, like, oh, this team is way above the level of the bottom 3 in LCS now. Like, when they get in, they're going to do really good. They obviously didn't even get in. And then you had the Coast lineup of that later era where they were just bodying the Challenger scene, doing an insane number of runs, like 27-2, like crazy numbers if you ever go back and look. And yet, actually, they narrowly got into LCS. Like, it was ridiculous, actually. I mean, obviously, they hadn't been fully relegated. They'd been relegated technically, and then they had to play and get back in, so they'd been able to play the off-season of Challenger. But again, they'd been incredible, and it's not like they came in and did like a Cloud9. So I was wondering, okay, where we're going to go. And I think a lot of people maybe were in a similar boat. But they come into the scene, and like I described before, LMQ, for all intents and purposes, finished top of the league in terms of record. Now then, let's look at some of the stats behind the team and see kind of like, let's tell more of a tale here. Not just games won, games lost. Let's see what individual areas they were good in, what they were bad in, what the difference was to the other top teams. So the first place I'm going to go ahead and look is, we'll look at the fact that despite their really strong season, where, like I said, they got the most wins in the league, tied for it, they were able to win 18 out of 28 games, so 64% win rate, very respectable. They were, in the end, actually, for all the being tied for first for so long and then being first in their own, like, they actually, in the end, kind of limped into the playoffs. Because in the end, despite that great record, they lost 3 of the last 5 games. Now, they came in with a number 2 seed because they finished tied for first and Cloud9 had the tiebreaker. So they get the number 2 seed, so they're going to skip a playoff round. Now then, if you look at their bracket, believe it or not, getting number 2 actually ended up being a better bracket for them. They got almost the perfect bracket because their side of the bracket is they will play the winner of TSM and Dignitas. Now, against 3 teams, CLG, TSM and Dignitas, LMQ went a combined 9-3. So an incredible record versus 3 of the teams that had been in the top 5 for so long. Against Cloud9 and Curse, and Cloud9 and Curse, remember, are on the other side of the bracket. Cloud9's on the other semi-final and Curse is playing CLG on the other side. They had a 2-6 record. So, okay, actually, it wouldn't have been entirely as bad as I made it out sound there, since obviously if they'd have gotten first, they'd have replaced Cloud9. But let's imagine a world in which, for some reason, Cloud9 hadn't have finished first. If they could have gotten a bracket where it was Curse and Cloud9, as I'm mentioning here, then obviously that wouldn't have been a good scenario for them. Whatever permutation we'd have needed over the last 2 weeks to get that. So actually, LMQ, despite their limp into the playoffs, it's actually ended up being kind of a boon for them. And so we're going to go down now some more statistical stuff. When we think of LMQ, the team, don't even go into the team itself. Just think Chinese teams. We all know what the famous kind of like stereotype of these teams are. Love team fighting. They live to team fight. Never seen a team fight they don't like. Well, LMQ really has represented that when they've come into LCS NA here. This is a team where they love to fight all over the map. And they're willing to take fights and trade and go, listen, we'll accept potentially dying here to get kills. They'll do that all day long. And they've really established themselves as that's what they love to do. I mean, think of this. They've got the most kills in LCS NA. They've also got the second most deaths. Now that tells you this is a team that, listen, they're up for fights. That means you're not only getting your kills and it's like, yeah, we're dominating, but you're willing to go into situations where, yeah, you're going to die. And you're willing to say, listen, I think I'm going to get the kill here. That really shows the mentality of this team. They're a team that's not afraid of a fight. It's not like they're the teams where, think about some of the other teams in the history of LCS NA. These teams would get into scenarios where they didn't really want to fight. They'd posture, but then they didn't understand tactically what we meant to do in this situation. And so they'd take, well, in NA, it's always the famous Baron fight where, like, after the fact, you're like, why did you take that Baron fight? You were ahead and you didn't need the fight, or vice versa. Like, you were slightly behind, but that was such a risk that it was going to definitely throw the game for you, whereas maybe you could have ground back in. Where other teams are kind of feel like they're forced into fights, LMQ's looking for fights. They want fights. There's almost no fight they want to turn down in a game. They're not one of those like Alliance style, no, no fights and just try and grind these little edges up. Likewise, you look down the roster and you'll see this same pattern repeating again and again, because all of the players are top 2 in kills made in their role. Now that's just not telling you, okay, it's not that you just, okay, the way sometimes people talk about LMQ is they mention this story that Monty's referenced a lot of times where Doublelift and Vasilii get into these crazy back and forths where they just want to trade all the time in every scrim. It's like that with every player on the team. It's not just like they have the one ham player, like obviously Doublelift in CLG is the player who wants to go ham all the time. Everyone in this team loves to fight and wants to get in there. Ackerman, top laner, second most deaths of any top laner. No Name has the most deaths of any jungler. I mean, people always joke that like Chinese junglers don't exist or they're not very good. Okay, most deaths of any support. So this team almost won LCS NA outright, and yet they're dying a whole ton. But that's because they want to create these situations, they want to get fights, and that's actually also, this is one of the interesting things about teams and meta games in general in esports. You can't just look at teams' downside, their weaknesses, and go, okay, just eliminate those and you'll be fine. Because you're seeing here, the reason they're dying so much is because they're going into scenarios which are also then getting them the kills, which are actually doing better at in terms of kills than deaths, which are making them a winning team and playing to their strength and making them one of the best teams. So that's why you can't just naively think, just take away the negative, because actually taking away the negative there would take away some of the positive too. You'd probably be a worse team. Like, I can't imagine this team being super passive, only trying to farm, trying to disengage. That wouldn't be LMQ at their best. So you have to take kind of the rough with the smooth, as we say. It's an English idiom. And so now then, if they're a team that like to die, they like to kill, whereabouts are they getting these leads here? In the first 20 minutes, this team has the most leads at 10 minutes. They have the most leads at 20 minutes. They have the most early kills by far in the whole league. They have the second most first bloods. They have the most first towers. And they have the second most first dragons. Now let's think of these two things here. Most leads at 10 minutes, most leads at 20 minutes. Because they love to fight and they're getting more kills than they're getting deaths, even though they're getting a lot of deaths, they're putting themselves in positions where they're getting leads from the beginning of the game onwards. Other teams, maybe they wait a minute, maybe they have a plan, maybe they see how the game shapes out, maybe they react to the other, maybe they formulate a plan that they're going to engage. No, LMQ's is looking for fights and they're looking for situations. Any opportunity it opens, it's like you open the door a little crack, they're going to shoulder barge their way in there. That's what they're going to do. That's what LMQ is all about. So as a result, because they're doing better in these engages on the whole, they're getting these leads. And when you get leads at 10 minutes and 20 minutes, and you're a strong team and you like to fight and you win fights, you're going to win games, you're going to snowball games. When you talk about those last three stats I gave you, second most first bloods, most first towers, and second most first dragons, that's telling you right there, again, this is a team who want fights. If they're in a situation where someone's going to fight them, then they're going to get the first blood out of it. They're going to go for the first tower. They're going to go for those dragons. They're not just going to give up the dragons. One of the things, okay, I always mention this about Cloud9 when I did my article on them, is it was amazed to me how many free dragons they got. And that was because teams would play Cloud9. They would know they were going for the dragon. They would know maybe we could fight this, but they'd know, okay, Cloud9's pretty good at team fighting. So, you know what, let's just let them have this first dragon. We'll find a different way to get back in the game. LMQ is not that team. If they see you taking the dragon, well, we're having a fight at dragon then. If they're taking the dragon, I think you'll see teams actually doing kind of what I described it to Cloud9 there. They'll say, well, LMQ's really good at team fighting and they really want these dragons. So, you know what? Give up the first one. Let's hope we can place it. And so as a result, you can see how these stats are kind of forming here. In terms of objective control, now, I have to admit, okay, my friend Monty, the coach of CLG, he's partially responsible for this, but he plays into a cliche that has existed and is something real as a stereotype in history, which is in Chinese LoL history, there is this stereotype that they don't really care about objective control so much. We've heard the famous jokes where they say, oh, the towers don't exist for the Chinese teams. It's true to a degree. I mean, they like to tower dive, they like to get in there early, but they've never really played that like close out, grind them out, CLG, Cloud9, SK Gaming in the last two splits style of play where you just use your little lead and then you pressure it all over the map and you use the map to your advantage as well as having more CS, having more kills, having more gold. You use the map itself to fight against the enemy. This is a team where the Chinese teams, they've had a trend. People said that they didn't do that. It's not entirely true, actually. If you listen to some of the experts and you read some articles about Chinese LoL and you just go and watch it and listen to good commentators, you'll see that there are teams who understand this and they just have a different style in that sense. But here's an area where LMQ might have surprised some people. And I think even Monty himself referenced that, okay, as the season went on, maybe he saw there was some refinement. There was a little more subtlety than just being balls to the wall, team fighting, like rowdy kind of play. No, there was some patience there. And so, okay, in terms of objective control, it's actually been quite strong for LMQ. But that actually is balanced also by they do have, you know, reasonably weak macro strategy in that sense, okay. Which is, it's interesting because I noticed the two things often overall get conflated together. People think if you have good objective control, then you also have good macro strategy. But those can be two different things, actually. Like, I think a good example of that would be last split. In the spring split, when I watched games, I would see that actually CLG had pretty decent neutral objective control. They kind of know when to take dragons and go for the Baron and all that sort of thing. But their overall macro strategy wasn't so good. Like, they would take towers at sometimes the wrong time, and they would take a fight that was the wrong fight for them. And so you can see how these two things, okay, they in general go hand in hand because the teams that are good at one tend to be good at the other, but it's not 100% a direct connection there. It's more indirect. And so in this sense, let's go through some stats that'll tell you why they're strong in one and not so strong in the other. So they get the most Barons and Dragons, and crucially, their opponents get the fewest Barons and Dragons. Now, I mean, there's something obvious that's immediately going to be telling you that, which is that they like to go for a lot of Barons and Dragons, And crucially, they're winning the fights there, or they're making scenarios where their opponent just can't come and get it. Can't come and even get a fight. So either the opponent takes the fight and they win it over them, or the opponent just goes, you know what, forget about that. They've got that already. So that's a huge stat if you want to talk about objective control. They have the 4th highest towers per minute. On average, they have the 2nd fewest towers per win, fewest towers per loss. Now that's actually an interesting stat there, because you see that despite all these barons and despite all these kills and all the rest of it, they're not up there. They're not just taking towers all over the map. They're not like Cloud9 of the past when they were dominating, like, oh, always just towers. Always the tower lead ahead. Even in games they're behind so that they have a chance to get back in. This is a team that's winning by killing you, having gold lead, and eventually just ending the game. Okay, maybe in a huge team fight, then end the game. Even in losses, they have the fewest towers in losses. So it's not like they're playing that game of always think about towers, and if something happens here, is there a tower we can trade for? That's not LMQ's style. And you're seeing that because in the wins, they're not getting that many. And in the losses, they're not getting that many. So they're just not putting themselves in a position. That's not a focus for them. It doesn't necessarily need to be. They've got an effective style. Now then, when they have these leads going on, even though they put themselves in a position to get those leads but most leads at 10 minutes, most leads at 20 minutes, they throw a lot of those leads. And if you think about it, this is going to make sense. Okay, so they have 5 games where from a 10-minute lead, they went to no lead at 20 minutes. They have 3 games when they had a lead at 30 minutes and went on to lose. That's actually the most of anyone. You have to think of it this way. Part of the reason, when I said before about how when you're critiquing teams and analysing them, think of their strength and think of their weakness, but look if there's a connection between the two, because then you can't just say get rid of the weakness, or you might get rid of some of the strength. Likewise, some of the strength is going to lead to some of the weakness. So let's think of that way. If I'm thinking of a team that has all these leads at all these times, they're willing to take fights all the times, they want to take all the fights at the Baron and the Dragon, and it's working most of the time, then that's also going to lead to situations where you get an early lead, but then you take another fight, and then you do lose that one this time, and then that leads you out of it, takes the lead away and gives it to the opponent. And then sometimes when you're up in a really big scenario, okay, you have kills, you have gold, you've been taking dragons, you're taking barons, but you're not taking that many towers, and then you lose some key fights. Guess what? That's going to turn a game around, because suddenly, okay, the enemy might not be super far behind in gold or something, it might be just a few kills down. You might have had a lead, but then unfortunately that's a scenario where, because you haven't pressured the whole map and you haven't built in another aspect to give yourself an impetus to win, regardless of just individual play, then yeah, the enemy can do those games where they take one key fight, or they take one key fight that leads into another good fight, that the 2 fights mean that they win the game completely. So okay, it makes sense that they're throwing these leads. They're getting a lot of leads as well. That's the crucial thing. They have the 3rd longest average game time in wins. Now, part of the reason again is this: they're not controlling the map and pressuring the map and taking all these towers, which puts pressure on the opponent, which then forces them into worse situations, which then gives you more control, makes them more reactive. They're not doing that. They're beating you with skills, kills, wins, gold, all these dragons, barons, these sorts of things. And so as a result, it takes them longer to win games, because, okay, just stacking up gold and kills doesn't end the game. Now then, there is something to be said in this area, which is that there's almost a degree to which I've kind of joked on Summoning Insight that if we could go back in time, everyone would just first pick XiaoWeiXiao if they were doing the Fantasy LCS. Because I've seen games where LMQ was miles ahead, and any other team, if they got a couple of those fights and got someone snowballed, like they get XiaoWeiXiao in this team, they'd just end the game. They'd go, right, you know what, forget fighting, we've got such a massive lead. For the enemy to take fights with us, we just kill them. And so as a result, pressure them up, take the towers, close the game out, just grind them out like Cloud9 style, and you just win the game in 5 minutes. Instead, it feels like LMQ's like, you know what, this is where I want to be. I'm totally fed. I've got all my items. I love to fight. And no one can fight me. I can 1v1 anyone. You know what? Let's just stay in this game for 10 more minutes. That's obviously a joke. That's not really what they're thinking. But it's kind of the way it plays out overall, beyond the joke. Now then, let's look at... We've kind of defined the team there. And I've kind of like given you some of the strengths and weaknesses for the style that the team has. But now we want to look actually at some of the champions that they have. Now, before we go into the individual champions, which I'm gonna flick over and show you player by player, let's think about this. They have the most unique champions played of any team in all of LCS NA. They have 44 total that they played. That's incredible. When you think of some of the teams, think of when I did the CLG episode, if you saw that, where you went across some of the teams, and when you got to Dexter, the jungler, This guy was playing Elise all the time if he could. You got to Afro Mu, the support player, the star support. He was trying to play Morgana every time he could out the door. This team, it's not like that at all. They have a wide amount of champions they're willing to draw from. Not necessarily because they're winning either. They're just willing to mix things up and they're willing to go in different ways. Actually reminds me a little bit of, in Europe, we have the mid laner Overpow. And even if he doesn't win on them all, he's one of those guys who's like, listen, I'm going to play more champions than anyone. And it kind of reminds me of that in terms of that approach, okay? Each player in the team has 2 champions that they are great on, except XiaoWeiXiao, because XiaoWeiXiao is kind of doing this Overpower thing, except he's winning a lot more games. He's just playing a million champions. Every other player, though, okay, they have the 2 champs each that they're really good on. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, if a player is really good on 2 champions, well, you're going to target ban them, right? Well, you obviously can't do that if 4 players are really good on 2 champions. At most, you can only take away 3 of those. And then if their star player isn't even one of those 4, if he's the mid laner and he's playing anything, well, now what do? Do you take away one of his and he can still play something else and beat you? Maybe, maybe not, depending on if that's really killer to the comp that you're going to play. Do you take away a specific player? In which case, at least then you have an identity of like, in a win, since we've taken that away, now we kind of have a sense of where their weakness should be compared to the overall team otherwise. Yeah, it makes it difficult to do champ select against a side like this, despite thinking the other aspects. When people say they're not so strategical or they don't know how to close games out, people are going to think, oh, okay, well, it's easy to know what to do. No, sometimes, like you'll see in often sports like basketball, hockey, just because you know what the opponent's going to do, what plays they're going to run, what player's going to be what in position, doesn't mean you can stop it, because the reason why they're running that play over and over and over and putting that player in that position is he's successful, and that's where he's at his best. That might be his strength, that might be your weakness. So just because you know what's coming doesn't mean you can stop it. Now then, let's go and look at some of the actual champion stats, because I have a graphic I can show you while I'm talking here. The technology is just incredible right now. This is about as much as I can do right now, folks. So let's start at the top here. We've got Ackerman. I still think of his name as Godlike. I think Godlike's a way better name, but I won't get into that right now. Ackerman's 2 specialties, Gragas and Lulu. Now, that kind of tells the story of what this split's been like for the top laners. We saw a lot of Lulu earlier on, and we saw people using it very effectively. And then Gragas obviously came in later on and became very strong. But actually, he was using it a lot longer before we saw people now like Soras pulling it out, etc., and people like that. This kind of reminds me of the joke that people make on Reddit at the moment, that at the moment, top lane is just the home for the failed mid laners. Like if a champion's super OP, you just put it in the mid lane and you're going to dominate there. If it's not quite that good, then you just try it at the top lane and it'll just bully everyone else out there. And the joke goes like that anyway. So once you go beyond that though, okay, he's got another champion that actually I think it's actually questionable if you say what his second best champion is. Is it Lulu? Is it Shyvana? I mean, he's played one less game on Shyvana. He's lost one less game, so it's not really that significant. And Shyvana, every really good top laner needs to play this. For me, Shyvana in the last split was kind of like when Diamond Proc said that line about how you had to play Lee Sin if you were going to be a really good jungler. That's what Shyvana's been. If you can't play Shyvana, you're probably not going to be a really good top laner in the last few metas. His Shyvana's been pretty good as well. So with him, I can go ahead and say, okay, compared to the others, I'll maybe say that he actually has 3 champions he's great on. Once you get beyond that, though, it's pretty barren, actually. I mean, you go and look at... He's got 5 other champions here. Renekton, Kayle, Jax, Jace, and Maokai. And of those champions, he's only got 2 wins, and he's got 5 losses. So that's not particularly good at all. And that group of 5 champions outside of his top 2, he's only 7-6. Whereas you go to his 2 main ones, 11-4. Incredible record. Now then, you go down to the jungler. Like a lot of people in the last split, he's playing Lee Sin, he's playing Elise, he's playing these mechanical junglers. He's very strong on them. He's got a 13-5 record across the 2. Okay, that makes sense. What's a bit curious, though, is that you go down the list here, and you go and you see Kha'Zix. He's 0-1 on it, actually. You'd think maybe that would be up there with the Elise and the Lee Sin if that's the sort of champions he's playing. You go to Rengar, pick that was strong for some people. He's only 1-1. You go to Evelynn. He's 1-0, and yet bizarrely that's the only time he plays it. And then what's interesting here is if you just want to see how in. What's funny is people always criticize China for playing this weird meta, but I understand why it works in China, because since everyone else plays that meta, actually some of the more ideal, optimal picks from other parts of the world might not work there, because you have to play against what your opponent's playing and what he's going to do. That's the same reason why, for any NA fans, Europe has always had this weird quality where they would have certain picks that wouldn't happen in the other regions. It's not that they're just idiots. It's that when you're playing against other things, it opens up certain things and it takes away other things. Now, an area here that's interesting and why I'm bringing that up is because in China, they have this weird jungler meta where, you know, that period of time when NA was all about like, oh, we got to get Lee Sin, we've got to get Kha'Zix, we've got to get Evelyn, we've got to get Lee Sin. These are the 4 junglers, these are the only junglers that exist. Like Crumbs came on my show, he was complaining like, you can't play anything beyond this. Well, in China, they had this weird scenario where, listen, China's always been in love with Nunu for some reason. They just love that. I don't know if it's because they love those Baron Steels or what, but recently they've been in love with Jarvan. They've been playing Skarner. These have been like contested picks, and like Lee Sin and chaps that can sometimes be like the situational picks. So it's what's curious here is that mentality is being brought over to this NA team now. I wonder if that means that No Name was actually watching China and that's where he was taking his cues from the better junglers there, or whether it's just something about the style. It's an interesting side point. Anyway, if anyone has something for that, that's food for thought. Give me your theory, because I'd love to know. You go down to the mid lane and holy moly, this guy's played a lot of champions. Let's have a counting up here. There's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 champions played. That's baller right there. 14 champions. Not only that, of those, the only ones that he has a losing record on is 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, he only has a losing record on 4 or 14. So 10 champions he has a even or winning record on. When you have that level of champion diversity, it's going to be incredibly hard, not only to ban you out, but crucially to know what you're going to play. Because again, look, the most he played any champion here was 3 times. You really can't get a sense of what he's going to do. And so as a result, if you do start spending bans on these other players, the ones who play mainly just the 2 champions, okay, admittedly Ackerman not so much. If you start spending all your bans on them, how do you know that something you ban out, that they pick something else? The something else they pick, they can now get Weixiao to do his pick to synergize even better with that. So again, it's a pick your poison type scenario. Probably the most impressive ones that we see on this list here is, okay, think of some of the champions that have been played this split in Korea in the last season. So, and the season before that. So Twisted Fate, Orianna, Yasuo, LeBlanc. These are some of these are like the auto bans that you just saw banned all the time. And if you play in solo queue, you'll be seeing Yasuo, you've seen LeBlanc. These are the bans that people are going for. Where XiaoWeiXiao, very impressive on these. And overall, just the sheer number of wins he's been able to... In fact, I look at how many winning champions he's got here. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, 9, 10. 10 of the 4 he's gotten wins on. That's very impressive. To get a win on 10 champions in a split. And, okay, let me just add this. And to finish that highly up, anyone can... I always think when people say, oh, this guy can play 10 champions. I'm like, well, mate, when you have that champ select open, anyone can click on the item and lock it in. Question isn't can you play it, it's can you play it in the sense of he can play it as in he's good on it, he's effective on it. And if we start going by that, then you saw that there's a lot of people, a lot of pros who will tell you they have this wide champion pool. You start looking at who they're winning on, and their champion pool narrows the fuck down. Maybe it's 2 or 3 people if they're just an okay pro, and even really good pros might only have 4 or 5 they're actually effective on. So, okay, it's not like XiaoWeiXiao's playing like 8 games on 1, 8 games, you know. It's not like he's doing that, but he's playing a wide spread, but he's doing pretty well overall. He knows what he's doing clearly. Let's go down then. We'll go to Vasilii. Vasilii was the man who came in with actually the hype, and part of that's because we heard stories from Doublelift about how he's this really good AD carry. I think I'm a Cute Pie even said he was good as an AD carry. This is the first person we noticed, and obviously, listen, he's Chinese. That's the other stereotype. China is known for their beast AD carries. An interesting side note. People always used to wonder, why is that? Why is the meta all around the AD carry? And actually, XiaoWeiXiao was the one who came up with a really good theory when I was spending some time with him in Korea last year in like the spring going into summer of 2013. XiaoWeiXiao told me, okay, he used to play Dota and he'd been to China and he'd talked to people there, and his theory was, since China loved Dota so much, and that's more of like a set thing of like where the carry is and who's the carry in this game. It's not such a shifting meta as League of Legends is. I think at League of Legends now, it's gotten to the point now where almost every role can carry. If you have a star player, then you have weaker players than others. You shift the identity there, a bit like basketball nowadays. Where in the past, you know, the center inside was the guy you had to have. Well, now it's shifted to perimeter game, and now almost any position, small forward, power forward even, think of Karl Malone, small forward, think of LeBron James or someone. Any position now can be the carry if you have the star. Dota wasn't like that rather. And so as a result, XiaoWeiXiao's theory was, due to their background with Dota and Dota type games, the Chinese teams still kind of were stuck in that box. That's just the way they thought of the game. And so to them, the main carry was the AD carry. It's the damage dealer, attack damage dealer. And so this is the guy where the team's just going to be built around that. And what happens is when every team's building their team around that, then other teams come in and they go, well, we're just going to get destroyed by their superstar AD carry unless we have a good AD carry. And so that's why you see, to make it to the top level in China, you have to have a super good AD carry, or you have to have a really good team-orientated carry, like a Sun type guy from OMG, who, okay, he's not that style, but he's got a different style that synergizes with the other stars of his team to counter that. It has to be that or the counter. You can't just have like an average player just left on his own. You'll get bodied and you'll be out of the league in no time. Well, what's interesting about that is, obviously, you can see the parallel to Europe there, where you had all those, the history is you nearly always have the star mid laners. That's the best teams. So let's go to Vasilii here. Let's have a look at him. 10-1 on his 2 best champions. That's unreal, especially in a region which itself, NA itself, had a bit of hype in the past as a stereotype that we have the ADs, we have the Wild Turtle, Chaos, we have Doublelift, we have these sorts of players. I'm a Cutie Pie. We have these players who, within their teams, are considered like, okay, in Chaos's case, not really a star, but no, star levels. And we have Sneaky came up in the latter days, top players with impressive results. Vasilii has gone 6-0 on Tristana. Really impressive start. On Twitch, a champion that, okay, there was a time where people think of Twitch as like, oh, this was a must pick, potentially OP champion. We think of how SKT was able to make picks with it and kind of change the way you used it at the All Stars tournament, and people thought, oh, it's what a strong one. But actually, one of the things I've noticed about Twitch is you put players who aren't that good at AD carry, Zephyr and people like that on, they'll just go ahead and not do that much on the champion. They'll use the ambush to get out of fights. They won't make it so devastating, but the champions who are aggressive and who like to use the ambush to get into a fight, they're the ones who pick you apart completely and terrorize you when they have the Twitch. Think of Imp when he played against SK Telecom K in the OGN Spring round of 8, where they just could not get onto him and he was just destroying them in those fights with the Spray and Prayer. Once you go beyond those two, okay, now it starts to get a bit muddied for Vasilii, because he's played. People were asking why Corki was being played in NA so much. You could ask that of Vasilii himself, because the guy's won 1 out of 5 games he's played on it. The other champions, okay, think about Lucian. Lucian, tons of people playing Lucian all the time. Every time they could get it. That was like a lot of teams were based around that. And this was that he only played it 3 times and he won 2 out of the 3 games. Go down the list more. We've got some famous AD characters. Like, think of the Kog'Maw. You saw so much Kog'Maw in Korea recently. The best players, people like Deft, looking incredible on Kog'Maw. Again, this isn't a Vasilii champion, really. He's lost 2 out of the 3 games he's played on it. Nothing particularly impressive. Now then, go beyond Vasilii. We've got 1 player left. We've got more. Another player like Vasilii, like XiaoWeiXiao, who's a support when he was back on the old LMQ. He's had a pretty obvious... Okay, if we can say no names, Lee Sin and Elise, yeah, it's pretty obvious, but it was interesting because it led into why isn't Kazakhs there? You know, why isn't that up there? Why doesn't he play Evelyn much? Well, you go over here, and again, we have 2 obvious picks to be your OP champions. You've got Thresh, and let's face it, no matter how much you nerf Thresh, his sheer utility will always make him OP in the hands of someone who's good or someone who's partnered with a good AD carry, those 2 things. But beyond that, we've got Braum. Now, Braum, anyone who looked at Kiwi Kid's resurgence and then kind of fall as a good player in LCS, it was all built around Braum, essentially. Now, it's a similar story here for Moore, but you go beyond that. Think of what Aframa was doing all his damage on when I told you before. It was on Morgana, right? That was his great champion. Actually, Moore's been pretty lackluster on Morgana, 2 wins out of 5. His Nami, another champion who can potentially do a lot with her utility, yeah, he's been fairly so-so. Overall, once, again, as the story with at least 3 of the 4, maybe 4 of the 5, you look at them and you say, okay, a couple of champions they're amazing on. Get beyond that, and it drops off real fast. Although they all play a lot of champions. That's another key thing. They're not just sticking to their 2, and then they always have the go-to third one. No, they're all willing, not to go quite to the XiaoWeiXiao level, but they're all willing to expand and try different things. And that in itself suggests something good, because it suggests that they're willing to play a champion for the comp. They're not looking for, what's my comfort? Have I got my comfort pick? Now let's make a comp out of the comfort picks. That sort of works. And do we have a sense of idea? No, they're willing to go with things that they don't normally want to play, but they think will synergize better with their teammates. And when you look at the success of the team, now that makes sense, doesn't it? Now then, let's look at a few more stats. When I showed you XiaoWeiXiao's level there, and you've seen, if you look at the weekly MVP awards, he's won a bunch more than anyone this split. His stats, unsurprisingly, for a team that loves all these kills, and it's a mid-centric game still in League of Legends, are incredible. The most kills in the league. Highest GPM in the league. Highest minion kills per minute. The guy's winning in every level here. He's killing you more than everyone else. He's getting more gold per minute, and he's getting more minions. I mean, I don't know what else you want from a mid laner at that point. Most unique champions played, as I already referenced, go beyond XiaoWeiXiao, and again, who was the other name that we all talked about? It's Vasilii. Now then, Vasilii, because of the stories about Doublelift and because of the stories about Monty telling about the fights and the stupid scrims that would have 50 kills in it, you're going to think to yourself, okay, I think I have a sense of who Vasilii is here. He's this reckless AD carry who just goes in on everything. He just wants to fight everything. He never wants to lane and just be safe. Actually, you look at some of the stats, Vasilii isn't on paper in the stats columns as crazy as he sounds, okay? He has the 4th lowest percentage of his team's death among all AD carries in LCS NA. So in a league with LMQ, Pi, with Wild Turtle, with Doublelift, this guy's 4th lowest percent of all the deaths among AD carries. That's pretty impressive, actually. That's not really the story that we'd heard about, how he's this guy who just goes ham all the time. 2nd lowest minion kills per minute. That actually has kind of a note that we can put on that, because you're going to think 2nd lowest minion kills per minute, so he's not dying that much, but he's not just like super farming. Again, you're thinking like AD carries. When we think of strong AD carries, a lot of them love to be in that off lane. They love to like group at the last minute, like Doublelift Reckless style, like, oh, let me just get a few more farm, Genja style. But actually, he's not getting that many minion kills. Now then, think about how they like to take fights, they like to get the early leads. That makes some sense to some degree. This is a team that's grouping early to get the kills. They're willing to roam and go get a kill. They're willing to go to the dragon every time they can. Go to the Baron non-stop. So as a result, you're giving up some farm that way. Moore has taken Exhaust as his summon. The Vasilii's support player has taken Exhaust as his summoner spell in twice as many games as the average support in the league. Now, that's going to help him protect Vasilii because, well, obviously he can keep people off him. He can keep any assassin. He can keep someone like Twisted Fate off him probably. That means that Vasilii isn't having to get into these situations where he's left on his own with no peel and he's just getting wrecked and he's having to go ham and either he kills everyone or he's just going to die instantly. You can see how that we're creating a scenario here where it makes sense that that's not happening. The front line dies a lot for this team. Now, listen, this actually sounds like a team that if you'd gone back to 2012 and used to Doublelift, oh, what would you really like in your ideal team? He'd be like, well, you know, I want everyone to peel for me. I want the front line to just be there right in front and I'm standing behind, kill him. Essentially what Uzi was in Season 3, you know. This is what Vasilii's got. His top, his jungle, and his support have the top 2 highest deaths per role in the whole league. Well, that makes sense because they're putting in the spacing, if you will, to use a basketball term, to allow their AD carry to stay in his range but not be jumped on and not be killed because people are there soaking up the damage and people are having to target and focus them down to get to him. That allows him to kill everyone else along with XiaoWeiXiao. And so, yeah, it's standard solo queue players. You'd want to see it, but this is kind of how you win as a team. And so I think after we've gone through those things, we've kind of looked at the strengths, but crucially, I wanted to tie the weaknesses in the strength because I always think that's a key concept in analysis. Like, I don't know that much about League of Legends, the game. I couldn't tell you the cooldowns of every single champion. How does this one synergize? And that's a different level of analysis. It's a different type of analysis. But I've spent enough time looking at games and learning the meta games of different sports and how they interact and how you take a piece of data here and try and look for something that will relate here. But this is a different type of analysis. So I hope people have kind of seen in this episode how I've improved it using the graphic, etc. And that as we go forwards, I want to keep doing this series, do other teams and profile them. And that's the whole point. We'll be profiling the team and then using the stats to tell the story. The stats aren't the whole story on their own. Like, look at this one number here. It's higher than this one. Therefore, he's better. No, we try to link it into something about what we know about them as players, about their mentality, about their history, and then the results. And we tie it all in and we try and see if we can weave a story like this. So that's been the end of this episode about LMQ. And I'll be back with another team in the next one.